Right, let's get into it. So yes, I am from New Zealand. Thank you for that, Lockie. I am been in Australia for 15 years now, so I don't know if that actually counts. I've been in Port Macquarie for, what, is it 2 years yet? Not even, almost 2 years. And we love it here. So, but this is my church, and this is our church, our family church, and we love it. So this week has been a very full week. I took my kids to play field hockey last Saturday. That was a lot of fun. So we did like little kids, like, you know, when they play sport, or they're trying to play sport. We all know the difference. They all just gravitate together wherever the ball is, and they just like hit people with a stick. That's pretty much what was going on last Friday. My son decided that he wanted to play as well, and so he did what I call stirring the pot. So he had a stick, and there was the ball, and he was just going round and round and round, and he couldn't figure out how to hit the ball. But it was very cute, and it was very funny, and I loved it, and that was a lot of fun. And then we had a full week of work where I was working very hard, as per usual. And then I went and travelled because my main thing that I do is I'm a business consultant. So I was travelling for work. And while I was travelling for work, my daughter decided she would jump off a fort at preschool and decide to sprain her foot, which we thought could have been broken. So she's off to hospital. And we've got balls flying in. And so she was off to hospital. My grandparents, who part of the reason we moved to Port Macquarie was because Maddie has her parents here. They were sick, and so Maddie's like looking after the kids. Things are crazy. Things are going on. I get back, and then it's just been a very full week, right? And then I'm preparing for Sunday, and it's just crazy. So, but who knows that like things can be really crazy, things can be really busy, and life is just going on, and there can be a moment where you get home and everything settles down, and everything goes quiet, and you can still feel a sense of loneliness, a sense of a gap of saying, look, you know, I have a full life, I've got so much going on in my life, but I still feel an ache. I still feel like there's something more to life than what I'm living. That can be such a common thing. I think we all feel that because what I believe is that we're all spiritual beings, and we live a very materialistic, physical world that tries to tell us that we can solve all of our problems with the physical, with the material, with life, with distraction. But I think we all know that we've all tried it. If we're in here, there's a reason that we're here, because there's a spiritual pull within us. And so the question that I want to ask this evening, I was going to say this morning, but this evening, is how do we satisfy that spiritual hunger? How do we satisfy that spiritual hunger? And so I want to go to a chapter in the Bible. We're actually going to go through a whole chapter. I promise you I'm not going to read the whole thing because we'll be here for a very long time. But it is a whole chapter. And it's just this whole interaction through this chapter just was really fascinating to me. So I found this fascinating. So I thought maybe you would find this fascinating. And so we'll go through it together. Sound good? Yeah. All right. So if you've got your Bibles or your phones or the Bible app, whatever you have, feel free to open it so you can make sure that what I'm preaching is true, the Word of God. John chapter 6. So the first part of John chapter 6, verse 1 to 15, is talking about the feeding of the 5,000. Who knows the story of the feeding of the 5,000? Right? Okay, awesome. So the feeding of the 5,000 is like, I feel like it's the thing that we all preach on every year, right? Because it's such a cool miracle, right? Jesus is teaching, and he obviously was preaching for a long time. He was a long preacher. So don't worry, I'm not going to preach that long. Well, we've got some food though, so after the service, so make sure you stay for that. But he obviously was preaching for a really long time, and the disciples came to Jesus and said, excuse me, Jesus, these people are getting pretty tired and they're pretty hungry and we don't have any food, so can we just kind of send them off? Let's make them someone else's problem. Let's go and send them off to find some food for some lunch or some dinner. And Jesus turns around to his disciples and says, you know what? I don't want you to do that. I want you to feed them. And the disciples are like, we don't have any food. What are we going to do? So the disciples go out. They go, has anyone got some food that we can share? And and this little boy comes to the disciples and brings 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he brings them, and then so the disciples take this from this little boy, and they come to Jesus and say, this is all we've got. This is literally everything. See, Jesus, we can't have everyone here. We need to send them away. We've got two fish and 5 loaves. And so Jesus prays over this 5 loaves and this 2 fish, and they start distributing it. And 5,000 people miraculously were fed that day. It's an incredible moment. I mean, the people are astonished. They're thinking, how could this happen? There's 5,000 people here. Like, there's just no way that Jesus could have fed all of these people with these 2 fish and 5 loaves. And so they were just astonished. And so their response to that was, we've seen such a big miracle. This must be the Messiah. We need to make him the king. We need to make him the king over the Jews, and he's going to be the one that's going to deliver us from the Romans. He's going to deliver us from all our problems. He's going to provide all of our needs. This is awesome. And so they start searching for Jesus to make him king. And Jesus knows that's happening, so what he does is he withdraws himself up to a mountain to pray. All right? Okay, so Jesus is withdrawing himself. And then there's another amazing miracle with the disciples, but we're not going to go into that right now. So they go over to the other side of the lake, and these people, this crowd, they're still looking for Jesus. They're trying to find where is he, because they want to make him king. And they find him. They realize he's gone over to the other side of the lake, so they travel over, and they finally find Jesus. And this is the part that I find fascinating. Okay, so John, where are we? Okay, so they come to Jesus, and they're wanting to make him king. And then Jesus has this really interesting response. John chapter 6, verse 26. Are we all there? Okay. He says, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. I'm going to read that again. Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Isn't this interesting that all of these followers are pursuing Jesus? Right? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? They're like searching for Jesus. They're wanting to make him king. They want to worship him. They want to put him in this position of leadership over their lives. And yet Jesus is pushing back and says, you want me for the wrong reasons. Isn't that such an interesting moment that happens? He's basically saying to them, you're not wanting to make me king because of who I am. You're wanting to make me king because of what you can get from me. Isn't that interesting? The miracle was a sign, but it was supposed to point them to something greater, but they didn't see the sign. They saw the bread. They saw the thing that they received as a result of it, and they missed the entire point entirely. And so then Jesus does something really interesting. He doesn't turn them away. He issues an invitation. Verse 27, he says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. So what he does is he invites all of these followers into a relationship with him, into a relationship that doesn't expire, into a hunger that can finally be satisfied. So how do we receive that? So John 6, what do they do with this invitation, right? He says, come to me for food that lasts forever. And what is their response? Verse 28, what must we do to do the works God requires? See, they're still thinking in transactions. They're still thinking that a relationship with Jesus needs to be a transactional relationship. They're thinking about the works that they need to do to receive this everlasting food, this everlasting bread. And this is what his response was. His response is, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. And they immediately asked, verse 30, what sign then will you give us that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the desert. Isn't this mental? Am I the only one thinking this is just like a really weird conversation? Right, like Jesus has just performed this massive sign. He's done this miracle. He's fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. They come to him. They want to make him king. And they're saying, hey, I'm not interested in a transactional relationship with you. I just want a relationship with you. I want connection with you. And all he's saying, the work of God is this, to believe in the one who he has sent. That's it. To believe. That's it. And so what do? Oh, can we have another sign? Why? Like, isn't that crazy? Am I the only one? It's just weird. But that's what a transactional mindset of relationship looks like. I don't think they were malicious. I don't think they were bad people. I think they genuinely wanted to see the Messiah come and to lead them. But for some reason, they just couldn't get out of this transactional mindset. They just wanted to see Jesus as a supplier of their needs, as a miracle worker, rather than having an actual deeper connection and relationship with God. I was thinking about this and I was trying to work out, like, what would be the greatest example of what this looks like in our everyday life? And then I thought, oh yeah, I know. So when I was dating, who knows that when you start dating with someone, it's not fully selfless, right? All the men said, yep, right? There is a little bit of a trade-off. There's a bit of transactions going on here, and it's actually not a bad thing. I'm not here to say that that's a bad thing, in the sense that when you meet someone, you want connection, right? You might be feeling lonely, and you want to start up a relationship with somebody, and so you do things to try and get that relationship over the line, right? When I first started dating Maddie, we were doing long distance. And so I was living in Melbourne at the time. She was living here in Port Macquarie, and she would fly down to Melbourne to hang out with me. And who knows, I had a plan, right? We went out to some nice restaurants. We went to some shows. We went and did, a big tower, with the sunset. I did the whole shebang, right? I wasn't doing that because I had an intimate connection with her. I was doing that because I wanted a girlfriend, right? Like, there was a transaction going on here. And you know what the point is? That the actual transactional relationship is actually not a bad thing. It's just that if you stay there, if you stay in that immature relationship, it's not a relationship that can last. Right, the relationship has to go into a level of maturity. And I think that's what's happening here is Jesus is saying, hey, I get it. You've got some, you're here because of the miracles. You're here because of what you can get. But hey, there's more to this relationship. There's more. There's a deeper relationship that we can have when we understand this relationship with Jesus. So the crowd was still in the romance phase. They were still in the dating phase. And Jesus was inviting them into a much deeper connection, a much more intimate relationship. So before we want to move on, I just want you to think about this for a moment. When you think about your relationship with Jesus, what kind of relationship do you have with him right now? And if you're saying that, look, most of my relationship is built on, there's some things I need from God, right? I want to say that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying there's more, right? There's a deeper relationship that goes way beyond what God can do for you from the things that you're praying for and believing for. Let's keep praying and believing for those things, but there's more. Okay, so let's go to the next verse, 35. Jesus makes this great declaration. He says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I have told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. So he's shown them signs, he's fed them, and he's issued an invitation, and they still can't receive it. And the reason is because they actually don't know Jesus. They don't fully know him. In verse 42, it says, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, I came down from heaven? So what's going on here is that they knew of Jesus, but they didn't actually know Jesus. Who knows that, like, as Christians, sometimes we can go to all of the events, we can encounter the great experiences, we can have great, powerful moments with God, we can do all of these things, we can hear the great messages, we can even grow up in a family a Christian family that talks about God and Jesus all the time. But when it comes down to it, we know of Jesus, but we don't truly know Jesus. And I think that's what's happening in this situation. And this is the difference between the crowd and the disciples. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't, a spiritual maturity even. It was just time. The disciples were walking every day with Jesus. They were going to sleep. They were waking up. He was there. They were eating with him. They were going out. They were watching how he interacts with people. They were watching him teach. They were watching him, care for people and pray for people. They watched him pray. They had the difficult conversations. They wrestled with things with Jesus. The disciples said some dumb things. They didn't get it all the time, and Jesus had to let them know, right? But it was a wrestle, and Jesus was okay with that. But the point was that the disciples were spending time with Jesus to actually get to know who he was, and the crowd were just attending the events, right? They knew about Jesus, they knew about what he taught, but they actually didn't have that personal connection and relationship together. And it's the same in a relationship, right? In a marriage. Like, if you're not showing up every day and investing into the relationship, that's when the relationship starts to drift apart, right? In the same way that a marriage, you need to be showing up every day, you need to be having those difficult conversations, you need to be having, the date nights and all of that kind of stuff, because the reason you're doing that is you're trying to build greater connection and relationship with each other. So the question I have for you now, the second question I have, is, are you coming to God consistently, or are you only showing up when you need something? Right? Because that's a sign that we're still in a transactional relationship. Right? What we're invited into is something so much deeper. Okay, so then Jesus goes deeper again, right? John chapter 6, verse 49 to 51. It says, your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. The bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. The crowd are talking about this miracle about the manna, right? Which is when the Israelites they've just come out of Egypt as slaves. They're going through the desert towards the promised land. They're in 40 years, right? Just circling the desert. And in that time, God provided their needs by sending manna. Every morning, there would be this manna, like this kind of bread across the ground that they would go and collect. The problem was, and I think this is what Jesus was trying to say, is that manna lasted 24 hours. That provision, that experience that they received was only a 24-hour provision, and then they would have to go and get more, right? Every day, if they tried to hold on to that bread, they would see that the following day there would be maggots and it would expire, right? And so it was something that they had to keep going back to. They had to keep getting provided for. And what Jesus is saying is, that manna was great. That was a great miracle and that was a great provision for them. But I have something much deeper. I've got a bread that lasts eternally. And that's what he's inviting them into. And, here's the honest truth. I feel like as Christians, we can fill our lives with manna. Things that God has created that are good things, but they don't last, right? Relationships, sex, food, drinks, achievement, doing great things, money, distractions, sports. Anyone else? Come on. right? All of these things are not inherently bad, but they're not things that are going to satisfy us for the long term. But when we use them to fill a spiritual gap, they become a substitute for what God is inviting us into. They satisfy for a moment, maybe an hour, maybe a few days, but never fully and never long term. And we keep coming back hungry. We keep coming back trying to get more. And in verse 66, it's from this time, many of his disciples turned their back and no longer followed him. Isn't that interesting? That God is inviting them into a deeper relationship with these people. And he's saying, feed on me. I am the way, I'm the truth and the life. And yet they turn their back on him because they can't understand what that means. They're still stuck in a transactional mindset, or maybe that's all they want is a transactional relationship with Jesus. So they end up turning their back on Jesus. And I think this is why we have a season of prayer and fasting. Right? The reason we have prayer and fasting is because we take the things that are temporary and we intentionally remove those things for a season in order for us to go deeper in our relationship with God. So for those that are fasting at the moment and doing food fast, right? The reason we're doing that is we're taking the food away and we're saying, for this period of time, I'm going to focus on my relationship with God. For those that, can't do food for whatever reasons, there might be other distractions that they might be taking. They might be taking away Netflix. They might be taking away, sports, which would be terrible. But that could be something that someone's doing. But there's a number of different fasts or different ways. Fasting in general is a food thing, but there might be other things that they're removing in order to build a deeper relationship with God. And that is why we take this season in the lead up to Easter, where we're really focusing on that. And we're saying, hey, what are the things that are distracting you from building a relationship with God? Because you're being fulfilled, you're not short term, you're not actually going deeper with God. What if we took those things away so that you could go more deeper with God, right? That's the point of prayer and fasting. And that's why we take that, that moment, because a great example for this for me was like more recently, we've been traveling. Before we moved to Port Macquarie, we traveled quite a bit. We lived in a few different places and we didn't have our family or grandparents here. So often our whole life was done with our kids. Anyone else had that experience? It's great. I love my kids. They're awesome. But sometimes parents know what I'm saying, right? So we came and we got to Port Macquarie and we had our first ever date night with our kids. We actually could talk to one another for like longer than 10 minutes. It was like, whoa, right? It was amazing. It was a great thing. And what was interesting is because we set aside our kids for a period of time, all of a sudden we could have a deeper connection and deeper relationship because we could talk to each other for once. We could talk about the things that were annoying each other, right? Hey, you're doing this. You need to sort that out. That was mostly Maddie to me. And then we could talk about, hey, what are the new things, the dreams, the new ideas. That was mostly me, of things that we could do, right? We could spend that time and dream together and deal with issues together and wrestle things out together because we'd set aside specific time. And that's what taking time for prayer and fasting is about. It's to set things aside so that we can intentionally go into a deeper relationship with God. But it requires us to create intentional space. Okay, we're getting to the end. Verse 67, Jesus turns to the 12, to the disciples, and he says, "You do not want to leave too, do you?" And Peter answers in verse 68, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." And Peter wasn't saying, "I'm staying because it makes sense. Your teaching is awesome. We're not staying because you did this amazing miracle." Peter says we're staying because we know who you are, we know what you stand for, and we know what you've come here to do. You are the Holy One of God. And that is the answer to the hunger, not the miracles, not the provision, not the short-term fixes that we do. Jesus himself, to know him intimately and pursued consistently and encountered when we create intentional space for him. If we go back, John chapter 6, verse 35 says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The hole that's in our soul can only be filled with Jesus. Not miracles, not all the good things that God has given us, but Jesus himself is the only thing. So before we finish, I want to ask you to do 3 things. I want you to take a moment. If you want to close your eyes, that's totally cool. And I just want you to examine your posture right now. Examine where you are with Jesus. Are you in a place where you know Jesus intimately? Or are you in a place where you still have a list of things that you need from God? Is your relationship based on God's fulfillment of those needs? Or is your relationship with God based on your relationship and friendship and connection with him? Because it's not a bad thing to have the shopping list. It's just that God's inviting you into something more. The second thing I want you to think about is, how am I prioritizing consistent connection? Not just coming to church on a Sunday, not just coming to an event, but throughout the week. How am I creating space to spend with God? And number 3, how can you create space for God in your life this week? If you aren't part of the fasting season as part of us with the church, what is something you can do? How can you create space? What could you set aside? Maybe you could stop that 3rd episode that you've watched in a row on Netflix to spend time with Jesus. So here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to invite the worship team back up, if that's okay. I actually forgot to tell you we're going to do this. Can I get the worship team back, if that's all right? And we're actually just going to sing that last song again. And then we're going to finish, and I promise we've got food for you, so you're not going to go hungry. But I want to take a moment now just to worship together, and I want us to just put Jesus in his place. We just say, God, we love you, we honor you, we praise you, we thank you for all that you've done, not because of the miracles and the shopping list of things that he's done in our lives, but because of who he is. So I just want us to take that posture this evening and just say, God, you are good and we love you. That's all I want us to do. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to pray, and then we'll spend some time together eating. Awesome. So let's all stand.